Hey everyone, back again. We're here in lesson 3. We're going to be talking about the Treaty of Versailles here in this first video, picking up where we left off last week with lesson 2. So, reading through, we're looking at the lesson here. We've got last week, the final question had asked you to predict how the Treaty of Versailles would kind of shake out. What sort of things do you think are going to be in that treaty? And also, I asked if it was fair, if you think you could blame any person or country in Europe for the war. So, reading through your answers, I saw some interesting responses there as we decide how to kind of almost pit blame on somebody for starting this war, that domino effect. So, we're going to take a look at the Treaty of Versailles and kind of see who the winning countries were going to put the blame on. So, as we're going through the PowerPoint here, you'll stay on this lesson slide. We've got a place to put summary. There are going to be 4 major provisions here that we'll talk about in the Treaty of Versailles, what countries were there, and then just a few follow-up questions talking about the treaty itself. So let's jump into it. Now, looking at the Treaty of Versailles, this was the official end of the war. So the fighting had stopped on November 11th of 1918, and it's going to take a few months, about 6 or 7 months here, for this actual treaty to be signed on June 28th of 1919. Now, the countries that created this treaty were the winning countries. So the ones that came out on top, we've got France and Great Britain, kind of the first 2 big countries that were a part of the Allied powers, along with Russia. And then the United States and Italy were also present at this the negotiations for this treaty. Now, looking at the 4 countries here that were involved, there's a couple of important notes we can make. First of all, Germany, who is probably the biggest no-show here, is they were not invited to the negotiations for this treaty as the losing country. The people that did not win World War I, they were just not invited. And we'll see why that's going to be a big deal here in a second. And then the other big country that's notable as not showing up is Russia. So Russia, we're not really going to talk about them, but they were in their own civil war, and they had backed out of World War I in 1917, actually. So they were not there for the end of the war, and they were dealing with their own problems. There was a lot of infighting happening within that country, so they did not show up. So, what did the Treaty of Versailles do? Well, we have 4 different sections here that we're going to talk about. First is going to be territory. So, when a war ends, typically a lot of times, especially before this war was fought to gain territory, right? You wanted to expand your country, so you had to take over other people. And this war was a little different because no one was really trying to take over other parts of the world, but we are going to see that some countries are going to take some big hits to their size following this war. Most notably is Germany, the big loser here. They're not invited to the conference, and they're going to lose a large section of their country. Poland is going to be created as a brand new country over here, and they're pretty much losing all of that section. You can use Berlin here as a note here to see just how much area they lost following the war. Also, we are going to see Austria-Hungary split apart. Austria and Hungary become 2 separate countries. We're also going to see the creation of Czechoslovakia, which is a new nationality getting their own country. So new countries were being created, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania. It gets to expand a little bit. We're also going to see, interestingly, that some of these nationalities are actually going to combine together into one larger country. We have the creation of Yugoslavia here, taking over these areas down here. Now, the last major provision here in terms of territory is going to be the fact that Germany is going to lose all of its overseas colonies. Remember, one of our causes of World War I was imperialism, the fact that they were fighting over who could control what colonies abroad, most notably, we're talking Africa. And if we think back way back to March when we talked about imperialism, we know that Germany didn't even have a whole lot of footing in Africa, and that was something they could have gained by winning World War I. But as the losers of the war, they're going to lose everything. They lose all of their overseas colonies. And we know that that's a huge part of their income. It's a huge part of where they get their resources from for industrialization. So that's going to be another huge hit against Germany. So that is the first provision with territory. Second is going to be military, and this part of the treaty is entirely focused, once again, on Germany. There are parts of the Treaty of Versailles that say, quite simply, Germany has to limit its army to be incredibly, incredibly small. The idea being that Germany would not be able to fight anyone or go to war again anytime soon. So they were not allowed to have tanks or an air force, which were two of the newest things that were introduced in World War I. We saw the first ever tanks invented. We saw planes being used as weapons. So now Germany doesn't get either of those things. They also only get 6 naval ships. So a very small navy. Meaning they can't go and possibly take more colonies or anything like that. And the actual size and number of people they were allowed to have in their military was incredibly small as well. So once again, this part of the treaty is just against Germany. None of these limits were put on any of the winning countries or really anyone else. Part 3 is going to be about the money. So we already talked before that Germany lost all of its colonies, which is a huge hit to its income, right? That's where they're selling their goods to. It's where they're getting their resources from. And so they lose that major source of income, but now they also have to do something. They have to pay massive reparations. So reparations are essentially war debts. Now, reparations essentially say we need to pay to rebuild Europe. The entire continent basically has been destroyed. Much of France is in rubble. Much of Germany is in rubble. A lot of the world is dealing with this problem. And so somebody's got to pay for all that. And the Treaty of Versailles says that, well, Germany has to pay for it all. They're going to say that Germany has to pay $33 billion in order to pay to fix Europe. Now, that's a huge amount of money. That's $33 billion in 1918 money. When it comes to inflation, that's an estimated, if that were to be translated to today, that's about $400 billion. That's absolutely huge, right? Where is Germany going to come up with this money? Where can they have no sources of income. Their country has been destroyed. They are losing a lot of jobs and resources as well to build their own country up. And now they're being forced by this Treaty of Versailles to pay all of it back. Once again, we're looking at Germany as kind of being at the short end of the stick here. Germany is also going to be forbidden from making an alliance with Austria. So now they can't even make an alliance with their close neighbor, the one that they had been in World War I with. The Treaty of Versailles forbids them from making an alliance with them. And last, just kind of the general outcomes of the Treaty of Versailles. And this is the big one, right? All of the things that we've talked about here have been pretty much against Germany, right? Germany loses its colonies. Germany has to pay war debts. Germany can't have a military. And kind of the reason that the Treaty of Versailles says that all of this has to be is that Germany has to admit full guilt for the war. They have to say that the entire war was going to be blamed on this one country. Now, think back to last week when we talked about that domino effect, right? We saw it was started by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which is an Austrian dude who gets killed in Serbia or killed by a Serbian. We see Russia come to war right after that, and then Germany enters the war, and then France and Great Britain jump in. Is it really fair to blame this entire war on Germany? And then worse yet, Germany's not even invited to this conference to defend themselves, right? France and Great Britain and the United States and Italy get together and say, yep, this whole war was Germany's fault. We're just going to put all the blame on them. That's why they have to pay. That's why they can't have a military. these are the reasons why. And essentially, this treaty gets written and it gets brought to Germany, and they say, Germany, you're going to sign this. And they didn't really have a choice. They had already lost the war. They didn't want to get attacked any further. And so they're forced to sign this treaty, basically, that puts all of the blame on them. Now, the last thing here that we see in the treaty is the creation of something called the League of Nations to help create world peace. Essentially, the idea was that of Woodrow Wilson, who was the president of the United States at the time. He said that there needs to be this coalition or this group of countries that all need to come together, and in order to prevent war, we can kind of negotiate and solve problems there. Now, notably, the United States decides not even to join this league, even though it was Woodrow Wilson's idea. And we'll see that the League of Nations doesn't exactly work. As many of you know, this is World War I, and eventually we will get World War II. So that is the Treaty of Versailles. We'll see how that is going to affect Germany here in the next part of the lesson.